to order. And where we left off, Mr. Co-Chair, is we were on the spreadsheet of all the amendments of the House and the Senate. And I think we had just finished page 7?
Mr. Chairman, I believe you are on item number 93, middle of page 7. And for this, this is a House amendment. It is connected to item number 94, 95, and 96. They all relate to capital construction. And we do have a separate handout if that meets your needs with all of the capital construction requests. The first amendment kind of set the base for the House position, and it included most of the items that were included in House Bill 135, which did not receive the favorable number of votes for introduction, with the exception of EWC, Community College, and the Law Enforcement Academy. It also did not include Stolt Hall, the Gillette Community College, or the Veterans Home, although the Veterans Home was not in House Bill 135 either. The House position adopted, first of all of those except for the 3 add-ons. They also adopted $7 million worth of capital construction projects administered by the State Parks and Cultural Resources. That includes the Wyoming Territorial Prison, Quebec 1, water facilities, and trail facilities. They also appropriated or reappropriated up to $2.5 million from last year's appropriation for the Riverton State Office Building. And finally, they being the House, reverted $10.3 million previously appropriated for the Central Wyoming College Jackson Outreach Center. All of that action appears on line 93. Subsequent to that, line 94.
Mr. Co-Chair, before we go on any further, Don, go back. What was the EWC project? Remind me of what that was, because we don't have on the list here what didn't make it.
The EWC, it was a technical facility in the amount of $1,569,000. More specifically, this was an expansion of Eastern Wyoming College's Douglas campus. And there was approximately $24 million at the Law Enforcement Academy for firearm ranges, an EVO complex, and interior remodel. That was also not included. Finally, 2 other items. The Department of Corrections Women's Center Maintenance Facility in the amount of $1.5 million is not included, and the Recreation Center, which was a JAC initiative at the amount of $3.5 million state funds, SIPA, and $3.5 million local match was not included.
And the tech center facility expansion, Douglas, was how many million?
1.569.
Okay. Thank you. Representative Larson.
Don, would you remind us, most of those community college things were authorization, but I believe this was a general fund appropriation. Is that correct?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative. This was SIPA.
SIPA, yeah. Right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So you were going on to things that were not on this.
Not on the base list or the House motion. That's item number 94. And that was $37 million of SIPA funds for Stolt Hall demolition. I believe this was a Representative Western amendment. Subsequent to that, you had item number 95, where there was $33.34 million added in private funds, that could be local resources, donations, local bonds, and the like, for a Gillette Community College District NZ Center. And there were 2 additional items on this provision. The first item was a transfer of property from the Northern Wyoming Community College District to Gillette Community College District. And second, a transfer of property previously or currently owned by Campbell County to Gillette Community College District. Both of those provisions in the House amendment included payment for major maintenance by the state under the formula.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Don, if you don't mind us going back to the Stoats Hall one, which is line 94. That's for construction and demolition, I believe. Is that correct?
I believe that is correct. That was an SBC recommendation, a governor's recommendation, and a joint appropriations.
Thank you.
Oh, I see, Mr. Chairman. Our sheet says demolition. It should say demolition and construction. Thank you.
Okay, that was Stolt Hall, and then
Item number 96 is the last in this capital construction suite. This was $69 million of general funds. So this is the only general funds appropriated. All of the rest of this is special revenue, SIPA, or private revenue, or federal funds. And this $69 million of general funds was the federal portion until such time federal funds are received, at least that's my understanding, for the Veterans Home remodel. Just for the committee's clarification on this, the footnote that the JAC put on the Veterans Home is not on the House position. The footnote being...
I'm sorry, run that by me one more time.
So the footnote that mandates any federal funds received shall be deposited into the general fund was not included in the House amendment.
Okay, but there is other language in the House amendment?
No, it is strictly a appropriation of $69 million for the Veterans Home.
Okay, thank you.
The next item, if there are no questions on capital construction, is item number 97. These were budget balancers. There are three components here, all on the House amendment. First of all, the House spent less SIPA money than the Joint Appropriations Committee did, so they were able to revert or return $14.5 million to the general fund. That's item number 1 within line 97. The second item is a budget balancer to carry over fiscal year 23-24 revenue into the 25-26 biennium. This may or may not be necessary and was in part included to provide maximum amount of flexibility for both the Joint Appropriations Committee, not only on this bill, but any other bill with appropriation or property tax implications. And finally, budget balancer number 3, this provided for a backfill of up to $250 million by the LSRA to the budget reserve account. Again, this was a budget balancer on the House side to provide plenty of space for other bills on the floor. On the next page, you will see some smaller provisions that the Senate did in a similar vein.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, my understanding is we'd circle back around to these at the end, just like we did some of the other technical amendments. Is that right, Don?
That's the typical approach of the committee, yes.
Okay.
Item number 98 is the Senate position, Senate second reading amendment number 47. The Senate decreased or actually eliminated the $200 million deposit from the general fund. This should be the school foundation program account to the large school capital construction account. So there's an error on our sheet. Apologies. On line 98, that should say school foundation program to the large school capital construction holding account.
So instead of from GF to, it's from SFP?
Correct, sir.
Which is S5. It does show S5.
It does show S5. The language is incorrect.
Okay. Okay.
Item number 99. This is also a Senate third reading amendment number 30. The Senate eliminated the $20 million deposit from the general fund to the Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship. Mr. Chairman, the top of page 8 is similar to the one we just discussed, although smaller in size on the House side. There were two amendments that were made not effective immediate. The first one in the amount of $16.9 million from the general fund to the water development account. The Senate side struck the terms effective immediately, and they did the same thing on a much smaller appropriation. I believe that's about $2.5 million to the Capital Square Preservation Account.
Representative Larson.
Thank you. Don, remind me, I have in my head that we done that effective immediately to just capture those dollars and make our goldenrod look better.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, that's exactly right. But when you did that, it was at the beginning of the session, and there have been bills that have been moving through that change that. So we, depending on your action in the Joint Conference Committee, this may be unimportant, and you could delete it altogether, but we didn't want to limit the flexibility or degrees of freedom of the floors on their other bills.
Thank you.
Okay.
Item number 101 is a Senate amendment, third reading amendment 32, Division 1. The Senate deleted maquettes from the intended expenditures out of the Capital Square Preservation Account. Item number 103, the House added $40 million deposit to the 988.
Item 102.
Oh, sorry, item number 102. The Senate, on second reading, eliminated a $10 million deposit for the Wyoming State Museum construction account. Item 103, House second reading amendment number 33, the House added $40 million to the 988 System Trust Fund account. Both of these appropriations are general fund.
And I have a note here, appropriation for operations, approximately $2 million that would remained in the JAC bill.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is a deposit to the corpus, and I believe you're referring to the expenditures for the operation of the program.
Okay.
Next, item number 104. This is a $25 million SO, and SO means defined by footnote. And in this case, it is reversions from the 23-24 biennium. And these $25 million, or the first $25 million from the reversions, would be available for matching funds for the BEAD program under IIJA. That's a lot of acronyms. So the BEAD is Broadband Equity Access and Deployment. That's a federal program for which Wyoming has received in excess of $340 million of federal funds, or will be receiving, which require at least a 25% match from either the private provider or the public sector.
Mr. Co-Chair, between CARES and ARPA, I don't know how many millions of dollars we've had on broadband access. Have those all been spent and deployed, or are we still trying to get those out the door? Do we?
Mr. Chairman?
Representative Larson.
So our approach to this is what we've heard is on the ARPA dollars, they may or may not be available, or may or not be available for the IIJA requirements because of the timing in 2026. Then we had planned on using some of the IIJA matching funds for that as well. But then we took the 25 million for the clean water and drinking water funds, which really depleted that account. So we were kind of sitting there looking at as though the state's matching requirements to get the broadband was setting at a zero, and so that was the reason for this, was to try and capture 25 million for matching funds.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Maybe you can give me just a quick summary, and not now, of where we are on all those prior broadband programs. You'd think every mailbox would be wired by now with all the millions that were poured into us. I'd just like to see where we are. Thank you.
If I might, I could do so now or later.
Okay.
There are three primary programs. There's $25 million that was appropriated from ARPA funds. None of those funds have been expended, and they would be part of the reversions or potential reversions that are reappropriated in a different section in this budget bill under ARPA. The second item is not ARPA or CARES, but that is a $10 million appropriation from about 6 years ago, general fund LSRA appropriation. And your committee redirected, or actually has a bill that redirects the potential purposes for those funds, so they have not been spent either. And then the third component of that is ARPA funds for capital construction. This is the same $109 million fund that supported the Central Wyoming Community College Jackson Outreach Center. Approximately $90+ million was available for broadband enhancement, but that is limited to libraries and multi-purpose facilities throughout the state.
How much is that being spent?
How much has been expended? I don't know. I don't know.
Or allocated?
Most of it is on target. Excuse me, Kevin Haver, the Director of the State Budget Department. Most of it is on target. However, we did have an ETS broadband project that we are going to pull back because we couldn't accomplish it in time. And that'll go to the similar fashion to the libraries that Mr. Richards just discussed.
By on target, I mean, what's the dollar amounts you anticipate reverting by our October deadline?
None.
So it's all expended, basically.
Yeah, we're working that out right now to get the obligation straightened out by the time frame on it. And it's got a different obligation date. We're talking about the Capital Projects Fund, which has a different set of rules.
That's right, okay.
So, Mr. Richards, do we know why $25 million in ARPA hasn't been spent, and $10 million in general fund that's been sitting there for 6 years is not spent?
Mr. Chairman, yes, that I believe the understanding was that $25 million was going to provide the state match of 25% for the IIJA funding. The state of Wyoming received almost $350 million rather than $100 million. So the 25% match is much larger. The IIJA requirements also have resulted in about 6 to 9 months of pre-planning that also has to be approved by the federal government. And so while it is unique, the rules specifically allow ARPA funds to match IIJA, which is unusual. You usually can't match federal with federal. In this case, you can. However, I think all states are faced with the same challenge where the timing does not work out. The ARPA monies expire next December, and these funds are not yet in hand. So there's a timing problem for all states over the course of the next 10 months.
Okay, so the ARPA money will be spent on something else. It's not limited just to broadband. It can be spent on something else, I think. And then the 10 millions in general fund that's been sitting there for 6 years, couldn't we use that instead of putting another 25 million aside? Is it still there, that 10
It
million?
is there, and in fact, your bill allows it to be matched by these BEAD program.
So I think the answer,
So it's 10 million plus 25 million.
but the answer to that is, what's the total amount of matching dollars needed to fully implement the IIJA?
And to that, Mr. Co-Chair, I'd add over what period of time, because it's not going to happen all at once. This process is slow as molasses. I mean, we'd hate to put all the money on the table at once if we got 10 years extended spend out on this IIJA.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have the exact number, but it's right at 115 million. It does not have to come entirely or any from the state. Either the private provider or the public sector can provide that match.
Okay, thank you.
Item number 105, this is Senate Second Reading Amendment number 49, and the Senate deleted the JAC position defining average daily membership for the period of the biennium at 75% of the day as opposed to 80%, which is in Wyoming statute. Item number 106, this appropriates Department of Health carryovers in the amount of $13 million for purposes of demolition and abatement at the campus of the Wyoming State Hospital. The Joint Appropriations Committee set aside this $13 million in the account, and the House appropriated the $13 million out of the account for purposes of construction, or demolition, excuse me. Item number 107 is school capital construction, Senate Third Reading Amendment number 35. Go ahead.
Do we have a handout on that, Don?
We do not have a handout on that one.
Okay. Well, go ahead, proceed then.
Mr. Chairman, Senate Third Reading 35, Division 1 is line 107, and the Senate position was to delete all design projects for $20 million or $20.5 million, all construction projects for $91.3 million. We're going to skip a line. They also deleted the corresponding unanticipated funds for design and construction, so that's $6.4 million. And then line 108 relates to this $8.2 million you see. They added Sweetwater County High School as a component project.
Okay.
Item number 109. This is in section 314, the mineral severance tax diversion, but it really relates to the 1% severance tax, often referred to as the OPSTA. Wyoming session law requires that 50% of that 1% is deposited into the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund, and the second 50% is deposited in the Common School Permanent Land Fund. The House made no changes. The Senate position is to deposit 100% of it for the period of the biennium to the PMTF, or Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund, rather than the Common School Permanent Land Fund. The total net impact is $108 million forecast to be deposited in the PMTF rather than the Common School Permanent Land Fund.
Mr. Chairman.
Please, Representative Larson.
So, Don, if you could just verify, I believe that that was a Senate bill back in 21 that the legislature passed to do that. And so I'm wondering if I could maybe understand a little on what the conversation was to pull it out for this biennium and change it, putting it all in the PMTF.
Let me make sure I'm understanding the question. You believe there was a Senate bill in 2021 that would direct the OPSTA 50/50? Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so what the rationale is for changing here, direct it 100% to the PMTF instead of 50/50? I can't tell you. I recall the floor debate, but all I can recall is that the PMTF has a higher rate of return. That's money from one pocket to the other. But let me go back and look at that Senate bill in 2021, if you can grab that, and take a look at that. Thank you,
Senate File
Representative.
121, I believe.
Right, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman.
Please, Representative Stitt.
Mr. Chairman, so back up to item 107. And this, Mr. Chairman, this is a question really for the Senate conferees, just to explain kind of what happened. It looks like the Senate removed about $110 million worth of K through 12 school construction, and just wanted to find out sort of what you were thinking.
Well, it was, I guess I got to be careful because we're in the middle of that lawsuit, but I think the intent of the amendment was to make sure that the list of schools that were going to be constructed and the activities would be in conformance with the statutory and regulatory requirements that were established after we lost 5 lawsuits to the school districts as to how schools were to be selected for construction. And so it's not that we don't like new schools, you know, who doesn't like new? And so, yeah, so it was based on what we understood was the constitutionally, regulatory, statutorily required process, and that we did not want to jeopardize our position in that lawsuit by doing something that was contrary to that.
Mr. Chairman, as a follow-up, so is it the Senate's position that you thought it would be less likely to be subject to attack judicially if you spent $0 on new construction?
Mr. Chairman, it's our understanding that the School Facilities Commission under the School Construction Division is proceeding with all the Mercer studies necessary to come up with a list of construction projects that is legally defensible, but that list has not yet been finished. And I know from a conversation with my co-chair that he's got a different understanding of what we've been advised on that, but I can tell you that's what we were advised. That what we were doing was consistent with maintaining our legal position in the lawsuit, not through any animus towards construction schools.
And Mr. Chairman, we'll have time to talk about this again in the future, but I just don't think the Supreme Court has said that a solution is to not build schools at all. I just don't recall reading that in any of the opinions. So.
Yeah, and Mr. Co-Chair, I would just say, first of all, we won the last lawsuit, and which was a good thing. So we didn't lose 5. But I would concur with that the idea that the primary component of the lawsuit is that we're not spending enough on new schools and on education. It's not that we're not spending, it's saying we don't spend enough. And so the logic of just saying, okay, we're not going to build anything for another year in order to be conforming to a problem that we're self-created by us by not passing the appropriate abilities to do the construction in the last several years. And that was legislative inaction that led to our current predicament. So I would just say that moving forward with construction is probably in the best interest of the lawsuit.
Well, Mr. Co-Chair, I guess I'd hearken back to last session when there was a list of schools that weren't necessarily at the top of the list, and all the Ts hadn't been crossed and the Is dotted, and we went back and forth till the waning days of the session when we had a confab with our attorneys, and what we did is we said, here's $100 million for construction, School Construction Division, finish all your work, prioritize according to the standards, don't jimmy the list according to what somebody else tells you they want to have built, and $95 million of that money is still sitting there, but it's earmarked for construction. And my understanding is that some of the projects on this list don't say as recommended by the process. They say as decided by some legislators or as put onto the list by the governor. And my understanding is when we start jockeying around on that list and jumping priority, which is, if I'm wrong, you know, as we go through these discussions, we'll find out I'm wrong, but I'm not against building schools. I'm for defending our position in court, and I'm for building schools consistent with the process that we've got by law. And you know, if you've got a contrary reading from the attorneys, may we go into an executive session and get that briefing and clear the air and come up with an appropriate resolution. Representative Larson.
To your point that the money is sitting there for construction, and I just want to make sure I understand it correctly. So we've got that money and it's SIPA money, but then you come over and there's another third reading amendment 55 where we pretty well do away with SIPA. So then is that money go away with that if that stays in play? or what happens to that?
Representative Larson, I'd have to defer to staff whether that swept that 100 million that we agreed on the last session. That's the one you're asking about, right?
Yeah, I'm looking at those projects that we have there on that line there, the design, construction, and anticipated, and those are all, to me, to be S5, SIPA.
From the last session? No, my co-chair's shaking his head.
Or no, that's school foundation, isn't it? So I'm wrong.
Because I was going to say, it certainly was not the intent, the deal we made last year to put that 100 million there and make it
I
available
got
for
my S's mixed up.
construction still there. Yeah, okay. Yes, Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this conversation. I'm wondering if you could offer some clarity in terms of your body's conversations about concern about jumping the line, or the governor inserting a preference, or legislative body inserting a preference. In the budget bill on page 129, line 16, there's an addition from the governor. And then on the next page, 130, line 2, there's an addition from JC. Why weren't those stricken instead of this whole entire section?
Mr. Co-Chair, I can't answer that. And because of the litigation, I'm getting increasingly more uncomfortable carrying on the conversation without, I can't answer that question. All I can tell you is, we did what we were advised to do. And if there's contrary advice, let's all get in a room in executive session and get it straightened out. Anything else? All right, Don, proceed.
Item number 110 relates to section 315. The Senate's position is to remove the secondary caps on federal mineral royalty diversions. This is essentially a 7% increase in any revenue in excess of the January 2024 Craig estimate for fiscal year 2025 and fiscal year 2026, meaning the Green Books provide a distribution of 1/3, 2/3, and section 315 provides for a 60-40 split. The House position is to maintain the 60-40 split. The Senate's position is to go back to the Green Books at 1/3, 2/3.
I'm curious what the rationale of this action by the Senate was.
I think it was just to revert to the Green Books, although it runs contrary to 109, so I don't know that I can explain it to you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Item number 111. This is a Senate amendment, third reading amendment number 39. It deletes the $75 million appropriation for the University of Wyoming research and takes that $75 million and directs it to the Legislative Stabilization Reserve account. This was research that would have leveraged equipment and in-kind matches at the Center for Innovation for Flow Through Porous Media.
Mr. Co-Chair, you'll see by the vote there that I gave it a noble but failed effort on that one. Page 9.
Item number 112. This reverts, let me start from the bottom and kind of work up. The Senate position, Senate third reading amendment number 41, deletes the $200 million appropriation for the governor's large project energy matching funds. And you'll recall that the large is defined as anything with a state participation of at least $50 million. Subsequently, this amendment also put a hold on any expenditure from sections 321 and 325 from the 2020 session laws, which would have provided for matching funds for energy and infrastructure purposes. On the infrastructure purposes, there's approximately 69 million of the 75 million original appropriation that is unspent. And on the energy matching funds, of the $150 million, there's approximately $91 million of unspent funds. Under the Senate's position, none of those funds would be able to be spent. One last point, and that is the Joint Appropriations Committee elected to designate $24 million of the Section 325 infrastructure matching funds for purposes of clean water and safe drinking water revolving fund matches. This would also be caught up in the Senate's amendment and unable to be expended upon signature or effective immediate with the passage of this enactment pursuant to the Senate position.
So Don, remind me, 325 is large energy, or is that IIJA?
325 is IIJA and now clean water, safe drinking water.
Okay, and that was, what was the dollar amount remaining? 69?
69 out of the 75 million.
Okay, and then 321 is LEP, large energy projects?
Mr. Chairman, it's just regular energy projects, not large, and
This is called matching energy projects?
matching energy
MEP?
project, yes.
Okay, and
150 million appropriation, 91 million available.
okay. Yeah, hang on just a second. Let me get these numbers down, Representative Larson. What was it again now? 97, 91 out of 150? Yeah, Representative Larson.
Don, if you could just help me there, when you say of that 91 million is, or there's 91 million that is left available, is that how we're saying that? Is any of that 91 million under contract and just not been spent?
Mr. Chairman, these are all of the approved grants. So more than 91 million has not been spent, but the governor, and literally as of yesterday afternoon, because he approved a $2 million project yesterday afternoon, these are approvals. So $49 million has been approved. Much of that money has not yet been spent.
And that would be lost. Lost. It would not go forward to the project.
No, Mr. Chairman, my understanding is any encumbered amounts and the allocation would be encumbered. So the governor could make no future approvals.
Okay. And then so I'm trying to understand, would just appreciate my Senate colleagues to understand why we're trying to pull back on these energy matching funds with the success we're having. We've got 8 projects that have been approved, all for our fossil fuel industry. We have one for that's really exciting on the nuclear side. Conversation that took place on the floor that just had one in Fremont County approved today, that why we want to pull back on these, or what that conversation was.
So Representative Larson, I believe I can characterize the conversation as this. Going back to 2021 or 2022, I can't remember when the first origin of this was, there was this sense of urgency that there were these huge projects coming down from the feds, hydrogen hub, nuclear projects, and that there had to be this unprecedented amount of money in hand at the discretion of the chief executive in order to match rapidly and put these deals together. And then as the years go by, it turns out it's a much more attenuated process. And I think the feeling was, we're down here every 12 months, put it into the appropriations bill and give the legislature a chance for oversight on these projects. I believe that was the rationale. So the programs are still there. Programs are still there. So this is much like saying, as we often say in our appropriations bill, in our budget bill, subject to legislative authorization. Here you go, but it's subject to legislative authorization. We do that in so many other contexts. It was felt that it was done here. So the programs remain. The money's still there. It hadn't been spent on anything else.
Where does it say that the money is still there and that the program?
Well, it's in where it was, it's in the LISRA, unexpended obligated funds revert to the LISRA. It's there. The programs are in effect, and what it's saying is, bring it in appropriation and give the legislature a chance to take a look at the projects.
So as Mr. Chairman, thank you, that helps, but I'm trying to understand then, as the executive branch or the entity that's been, as that process goes through, they would only be able to approve those once a year when we're in legislative session. And so if there's Department of Energy grants that come out, like we see for, that require, maybe when we're not in session, how do we work through that?
Representative Larson, I'm characterizing, you've asked what the floor debate was and what the rationale was, and I believe the rationale was that it's a much more attenuated process than that. It's not, we leave here in March and all of a sudden in May, there's this big project and it's going to be awarded in June, that it's a much more attenuated process than that. It just doesn't happen that quickly. And the feeling of the bringer of the amendment and the prevailing vote in the Senate was, you've got the time. It's not as rush as we thought it was whenever we started this process several years ago. Bring them as these come up, cycle them through. I mean, if you look at the WEA's page, they're on a quarter to quarter grant process. It's the first, there's kind of discussions with initial concept and submit a concept paper in advance of the board meeting, and then they have a quarterly board meeting, and then if they like that, they tell you, come back with a grant application, and in the next quarter, they take the grant application. And it looks like it's a process that takes long enough that it's long enough for it to come in the form of an appropriation, just as any other large project does, whether it's a water project and that sort of thing. So it just does not look like it's been that rapid an onset of these projects. The gestation cycle is much longer.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Stith.
And Mr. Chairman, just so I understand, it's my understanding the way this would work, though, is that if there are pending applications for these projects under Section 321 or Section 325, those all lapse. Is that a fair statement?
I don't know that they lapse. They would proceed, and if they're awarded, then they would go on to a list at the supplemental that we'll be back down here in a few months looking at. The process goes on.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess that's the question. I'm not fully grasping how there's a belief that the process goes on when the sections have been defunded and they're in session law. So there is no more process, there is no more projects, because these were not set in the green books, they were set in session law. So if the funding is not there, then the concept goes away. And so all that you're discussing, it can't proceed when it's gone because the funding is now gone. So I'm not tracking your description.
Well, I guess Representative Walters, if that's true, that this wiped out the programs themselves, that was not the intent. And so we can certainly, as we work through the bill, take a look at what language would preserve the programs, but it's my understanding that these reverted the funding but left the programs. If I'm wrong, then, we'll stand ready to correct that.
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Thank you. Don, so a little more clarification, because there's some of the projects that have been, as I've heard, have been approved, but the contract is not in place. They may be obligated. And I guess that's what I'm trying to understand, is the difference between obligation and contract. Because my understanding is if the contract's not in place, that the funds would revert.
Mr. Chairman, I believe the language of I know the language of the Senate, and I misspoke earlier, does not use the term encumbered. It uses the term obligate. So the encumbered is a bit more of a nuanced accounting term. Obligate is, I think, typically known if the grant is if we have a B11, which we do on these allocations, that it seems to me, and my executive branch colleagues, Kevin can correct me, I think that is obligated for that project.
Okay.
Say that again. If the application, grant app's approved.
If the grant application is approved, we receive a letter, we being the legislature, and then we pass that on. A great example is yesterday, we received a letter for a $2 million project for Kemmerer, Lincoln County wedge coal access. And that seems to be an obligation of the $2 million matching amount.
Okay, thank you. All right. Any more? Okay, so Don, maybe you would direct one of the attorneys to get with me on the language to see the colloquy that I had with Representative Walters. We intended to leave the programs, just put the funding there subject to appropriation. So maybe you can have one of the attorneys get with me tomorrow. Sure. And Representative Larson, if I'm wrong, I'll stand ready to be corrected. Or Representative Walters, whoever raised the concern. Okay?
Item number 113, no additional funds. This is a House position, House Third Reading Amendment number 45. The amendment on the House side expands Section 325 from 2023 session laws to allow for projects beyond those for which a city and town had previously received funding or technical assistance from the Wyoming Business Council for preservation of a former school facility or community center.
You know, we may be amending this for the next 3 budget cycles. This one's really, just keeps on coming back.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question, this comes from last year's Section 325, based on the action of the previous amendment. Because these funds would not have been spent, obligated, or they'd be unexpended and unobligated at the signing of this law, these funds would go away. So this language really wouldn't matter because there wouldn't be any money available due to that sweep in the previous amendment. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, I do not believe so. Section 333 and 335 were not subject to the Senate's defunding. They only defunded Section 321, the energy matching, and 325, the infrastructure matching. They didn't touch the community facilities or housing.
Okay, anything else on that one? All right.
Item number 114, the Senate second reading amendment number 53 removed this section and $150,000 of general funds for the benchmark and performance compensation review. That's the State Treasurer's Office and Wyoming Retirement System investment staff. Item number 115 is somewhat related to that. The benchmarks and performance compensation review remains in the House position, but they did modify the language on the House side to include a review of the contract by Management Council and in consultation with the Governor's Office.
Mr. Co-Chair,
Please.
I presume you did that because of the qualification of the Management Council to understand consulting agreements for investments in setting benchmarks. That was a facetious statement.
Well, that was a House amendment. That was a House amendment. Require the Management Council. Be all kinds of people picking this consultant. Might be a big meeting. Okay?
Item 116, separate section 321, but similar concept. The House position only amended this section to include the Governor's Office in the review of the state budget management and reporting system.
Mr. Co-Chair, I'd like to take a look at the original language on that. I thought it's the executive branch that's initiating the entire review. I mean, it's not that big a deal on the footnote, but I would.
So this has to do with IBRs and
But we're charging the executive branch with leading the charge on reviewing the budget system, aren't we? Wouldn't that necessarily include the budget office of the governor?
Well, the money was actually, Mr. Chairman, the money was appropriated to the state auditor, a different elected official, and then that section charged us, Legislative Service Office, State Budget Department, and the state auditor to come up with a report and report to the governor's office and the legislature. And the House changed that to include the governor in the creation of the report, and then the results would be reported to the legislature.
Because they're concerned that Kevin wouldn't include the governor when he did the report.
It was primarily at the request of the state auditor not to be stuck
Okay.
with the.
Okay. Good. All right. Thank you.
Item number 117, 118, and 119 are all related to the transfer of the Kelly parcel or sale of the Kelly parcel. Items number 117 and 119 are closely related. On the Senate side, there was a third reading amendment number 44 that specifies as a condition of the sale that there be allowed hunting and leases for livestock grazing, and the federal government would be responsible for the fence replacement and maintenance costs. And on the House side, item number 119 is similar, but it does not have that last language about the fence replacement, maintenance costs, and the conditions can only, or shall only be removed by an act of Congress. In addition, there's item number 118, which is dissimilar. This is a House third reading amendment number 76, only on the House side, and it makes the condition of the sale of the Kelly parcel on the outcome of the Rock Springs Resource Management Plan, and specifies that the transaction only proceed if the federal government does not select alternative B.
So go again. On 117 and 119, the only difference is the Senate says conditions only removed by act of Congress, and then the fencing is the fence replacement and maintenance cost. Okay, did not have the fences. All right, thank you. Otherwise,
Quite similar otherwise, yes.
gotcha. Okay.
Item number 120.
If I may, on 118, Mr. Co-Chair, that was a Representative Stith amendment, and just a little bit more discussion about that so I can understand it better. It's intriguing to me.
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
So the section 324 as amended by amendment, third reading amendment number 76, makes it a condition of sale of the Kelly parcel that the United States Bureau of Land Management shall not have selected alternative B for very specific proposed management actions by the BLM. It's management actions 2207 related to oil and gas, and then it's management actions 6101, 6105, 609, and 610. Those all relate to rights of way. And the reason those management actions were selected out of the over 500 management actions that are included in the proposed resource management plan is because both oil and gas and rights of way were omitted from the governor's task force recommendation and comment to the BLM. So the purpose is to fill a gap. And of course, we're not telling the federal government what to do. We would never do that. But it just says that if the federal government takes certain actions and it places the authority and the obligation, frankly, with the governor to check the box to make the determination whether the BLM has complied with those conditions or not.
Thank you. So maybe I can get a full copy of the Stith footnote, because he mentioned some things beyond just alternative B. I'd like to see the whole thing. It's fascinating to me. Thank you, Representative. Anything else on Kelly parcel, folks?
And Mr. Chairman,
Please.
as a follow-up on that, I do also have the 1,200-page Bureau of Resource Management Plan here in this room that you can look at too, to just so you can verify that the maps do what it says they do.
Okay, I'll do that between midnight and 8 tonight. Thank you. 120.
Item number 120 is a Senate second reading amendment. This is the removal of section 325 which would have provided $3.483 million for state employer-paid employee retirement contributions. This, of course, relates to 2024 Senate File 67, which I believe passed Committee of the Whole today on the House side. The difference here is the House retained this provision in the budget. Last two pages, Mr. Chairman. Top of page 10, item number 121, the Senate position on third reading, number 46, removed enterprise inflation. This totals approximately $32 million in all funds and $28.7 million, $33 million in all funds and $28.7 million in general funds for purposes of enterprise inflation.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Larson.
Thank you. Don, what was that was the governor's letter. What was the original request, and then what did the Joint Appropriations Committee adopt?
Mr. Chairman, the Joint Appropriations Committee adopted that 33.29% or $1 million, and the original request, I believe, was 48,127,000, and that was general funds. All in.
Thank you. And then
All in, it would have been about 60 million, excuse me.
So then, Mr. Chairman, if you could, again, just interested in the conversation on doing away with all the inflation adjustments to the agencies.
I think it was just excuse me, I think it was the process that was followed. Initially, there was, rather than doing it department by department, it was done in aggregate. We were given some numbers that just didn't really satisfy the JAC, and then subsequently, we were given kind of a breakout on a spitball by department, where the governor was going to distribute it, and I think the feeling was, we'll be back down here for the interim. Let's take a closer look at it, closer scrutiny at it than just this broadside list. I think it's a process. It's a process issue. It's just we'd like to have a little better, closer look at this inflation than the process that we went through on JAC. Mr. Representative Larson.
Thank you. Was there any conversation about the adjustment we made to the formula that did then broaden it out to include all agencies and all units, or did that not have any?
I think it was the fact that it's just a very rough and ready kind of estimate as opposed to something that had been more thoroughly vetted. It was a compromise because it was a process that was not as thorough as we would have preferred from the outset. I think that's fair to say. And so it was a feeling that we'll be back down here for the supplemental. Let's take a closer look at it then.
Thank you.
Okay, 122.
Mr. Chairman, item number 122 is House Third Reading Amendment number 69. This provided $95,000 of new general funds for election administration and security. Specifically, this built upon existing Section 328 and provided this $95,000 for new voter registration law education.
Mr. Co-Chair, I'm curious, the figure was doubled. What new information was available to justify the doubling that wasn't available when we did our JAC hearings, if you recall?
So my recollection is that this was a motion by the Senate side, and we adopted it in the regular budget.
No, the doubling. It was a House amendment to double it from 95 to,
What was the original amount?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The discussion was just the overall concern for voter security and election security, and one of the best ways to prevent shenanigans, if you will, within elections is to make sure our clerks and the folks that actually administer the elections out in all the counties had more tools at their ready and more education on how to make sure they're safe and well-ran was the discussion on the floor, essentially.
Yeah, agreed. It's important. It left us, it was 95, it was doubled on the floor. I just wondered what information.
Mr. Chairman?
Representative Sherwood.
Thank you. So what we're talking about shows up on page 159 in the budget under election administration and security. And so there was an allocation of $100,000, and this was to provide grants for each county clerk to be able to go to training on election security. So we heard from some of our constituents that there was also a need to provide education to our voters because our voter registration laws have changed quite a bit. And so we wanted to make sure that there was a broadened approach for training and education and outreach beyond just the county clerks, but also to our constituents and our voters. And so it's not that the amount was doubled, but the purpose of the Section 328 was expanded.
So thank you. Mr. Richards, the appropriation was not increased by 95,000?
Mr. Chairman, it was increased by 95,000 for a different or a complementary purpose.
Okay, so the initial amount was, she said 100,000? I thought the initial was 95.
No, the initial amount was 100,000.
Okay.
The House added 95. And then I think the language there is for voter education regarding new voter registration laws.
Gotcha. Thank you. Okay. 123?
Item number 123 is a Senate third reading amendment number 48. The Senate side removed $18.3 million for purposes of employee compensation for filled positions. This related to Governor's Letter number 9, where the original request was $36.6 million for the filled positions.
Okay.
Item number 124, House second reading amendment number 46. This added it added an unspecified amount of money, which we have calculated to be $1,184,000 in order to provide a 5% increase for the next 2 academic years for all Hathaway scholarships, including honors, provisional opportunity, and need-based scholarships.
So Don, going back to 123, the Gov's rec was for 36, but then that biennialized to 72. And ours was 18 per biennium. So it was a 75% cut on what was requested basically by the chief executives. Isn't that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is accurate.
So I'm curious,
So-
Mr. Co-Chair, was that discussed on the floor of the Senate?
Let me make sure I've got the math right. The Gov's letter said 36 million for 1 year, biennialized to 72 million.
Correct.
Okay.
And my question was that discussed, that we were cutting the governor's rec by 75%?
You know, I don't recall that degree of specificity. It may have been. What I do remember is that this is the third round, tight on the heels of 2 subsequent rounds of pay raises that came in aggregate to, I think, 18%. And the feeling was, let's see how those work. You know, we had trouble filling positions, and then we've heard evidence here in JAC, such as DEQ, that since the 2 pay raises kicked in, they'd been able to fill up some positions they hadn't filled before. And so the feeling was, let's let those 2 raises go to work and see how that goes, and we can always circle back again. It felt like yet a third raise tight on the heel of 2 was a bit much.
Go ahead.
Did we go back there we circled back there from the Hathaway, didn't we? So now we're on 125.
Item number 125 is a Senate third reading amendment number 53. This provided for a reduction in FTE, specifically 42 FTE, as identified by the governor from either new positions or vacant positions as of that date, to generate not less than $3.689 million in savings from of any fund source or unspecified fund source. item number 126.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, Don.
Representative Larson.
So was there any conversation from our JAC members that pointed out that we have the opportunity or had the opportunity during all our budget hearings to reduce full-time employees in, I mean, it just seems if we wanted to reduce that number, why didn't we do it during the budget process, and why are we now, what's the thought process on then telling the governor to do it when, in that process, I'm just kind of curious.
So I think the bringer of the amendment had information that the budget process, the budget bill overall, this is my recollection, I can kind of see the handout, it was over 100 new positions. Now that included AWEX, converted to full-time, part-time positions consolidated, that there were 77 new full-time positions. The bringer of the amendment felt that that was expanding government too much, too soon, but did feel that there was a need, such as with DEQ, for some of those positions. So the bringer of the amendment, rather than picking through department by department, said, Governor, we'd like to cut back on the number of those positions. And here you go, this is how many you get, pick them. And so it came down that way. So I understand there might be a concern that since the governor didn't recommend as many DEQ positions as we funded, that could be a concern. There might be some other areas there where you really want to have those positions as JAC outlined. And I think we're amenable to hearing any of that and seeing what we can work out.
Thank you.
It just, if there's a way to achieve the savings that still fulfills your intent to identify the positions you want, we're open to that conversation.
So it might be helpful if we could see the handout so we can understand what the premises is for it. But, I mean, as you recall from our interim committees, we gave back to the Department of Corrections numerous new positions because we cut so many of them. We cut the staff down by a large percentage over the past few years. And so because of that, then as he has come back and started new policies, new procedures, he's come back and gave us new positions that he really needed just to perform the functions that he had. In addition to that, we have new positions. I think the original positions was over 70 or 80 requested for ETS, and particularly cybersecurity, and the governor cut that in half, and we cut that in more than in half. And so essentially, we're saying that and those are considered to be essential positions. And then we have DEQ, which we are essential positions. So it seems to me that, and then we also got rid of a certain position. So the total number of new positions, I think roughly was 55. Isn't that right, Don? For full-time FTEs?
Mr. Chairman, it was 50 positions after all those net actions took place, yes?
And so we're recording 42 out of 50.
Okay, Mr. Co-Chair, all I can tell you is that's not the information that we had at the time, 50 new positions. We had that it was substantially more than that. Regardless, the fact of the matter is it was seen by the Senate floor as a dramatic expansion in the number of employees for the state. And so it is what it is. It was cut back. If we can achieve the same objective but still identify those particular positions that you deem highest priority, such as DEQ, we're open to that conversation. But the idea that we're going to not expand the number of positions that rapidly in state government is what the amendment stands for, regardless of the fact that the governor requested more, we granted less. It was a net addition of quite a few new positions to the size of government, and that's what the vote was on the floor. So we're amenable to other approaches as long as we can achieve the same savings. Mr. Representative Larson.
My understanding is we're current full-time employees is less than we were 10 years ago. But was that, information provided to the Senate?
Representative Larson, without knowing exactly which numbers you're referring to, I can tell you that on the Senate floor, what we discussed was, it was brought up that during the first downturn, what was it called, phase one, the phase two, or phase three cuts, the first downturn, there were 450 positions closed out. Those were the vacant positions. Those are the positions that we as a JAC kept, every time an agency comes in, you say, this one's been empty 18 months, you sure you need it? Well, it shows how valuable it is. It's hard to recruit for. It's been there 18 months. What about this one? It's been empty 6 months. No, can't do it. When the order came down to slash the budgets, the vacant positions got closed out. So you didn't really necessarily reduce the head count in the size of government. What we got was just, for the first time, a real honest accounting of which of those vacancies were needed or not. That was part of the discussion. It's not like a few years ago, 500 people got pink slipped. So that was and I don't know if that's the same number you're talking about or not, but that was part of the discussion on the Senate floor.
Thank you. So,
When we get together in the morning, if we could get that original handout, it'd be helpful on the number of positions.
so then is the intent that it needs to be a live body? We're reducing a currently filled position. Is that the intent?
The intent is not to lay anybody off who's got a job now. The intent was not to create new positions.
Mr.
If you can get to the same position by closing out vacancies, that's something we can certainly talk about.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Pardon me, Mr. Chairman. And so for some clarification, because I did assist with this research on the Senate side, when you take out those net actions, for example, closing out of the challenge program and those 49 positions, that's what's counting in towards that net 50. So when you take those out, the number of new positions that were being added, inclusive of the DFS swaps from part-time to full-time, it was 107 positions. And so we do have that handout that shows what we excluded and what was left after we took out those swaps and some of those net actions to give the Senate kind of the number that they needed for that amendment. So we'll be able to provide that to you.
Thank you.
Anything else on that? Here are all my notes on the wrong line.
Mr. Chairman, I believe we're on item number 126. This is a House third reading amendment number 47, Division 2, and it provides for an increase in the monthly death benefit for duty-related deaths of law enforcement agents or a law enforcement officer killed in the line of duty on or after January 1, 2024 for the period of the biennium.
Mr. Co-Chair, where are your retirement bills?
Our current retirement,
Yeah, our
they just
retirement-
went through first reading.
Okay. And was there a move to put this into the retirement bill instead of the budget bill?
He had it, needed to correct it, so he's doing second reading.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Representative. All right.
Item number 127 is a $18.5 million SFP appropriation. This is House third reading amendment number 50. It appropriates those funds for the Department of Education for grants for mental health needs of students in K-12. Item number 128 is House third reading amendment number 85. This authorizes the expenditure of investment earnings from the Outdoor Recreation and Tourism Trust Fund account. I believe this also relates to Senate
File 40,
40.
which failed. We had another House bill dealing with this outdoor recreation fund today.
Yes, I believe House Bill, possibly House Bill 63 I have in my notes.
And refresh, does House Bill 63 relate to this in any way? I'm looking at my co-chair and anybody on the House side. House Bill 63, I think, was governance. I thought governance or something on this fund. What was, Representative Walters, what was the bill number, do you recall?
I don't recall, Mr. Chairman, I don't recall the bill number, but there is a bill regarding the governance structure of the outdoor rec trust, but there's no funding in that bill. Just how to distribute grants and set up a structure, mirrored after the Wildlife Natural Resource Trust Fund structure on how they operate.
Okay, and this is a House amendment, Mr. Co-Chair. I'm curious because this fund only has a $6 million balance. We're going to continuously appropriate the investment earnings for purposes of grants. I mean, investment earnings on $6 million aren't going to be a whole lot. Wouldn't it be better to allow it to accrue into the corpus and build that thing up a little bit? I'm curious why we're, if you know. Oh, it's a Bob amendment?
It was a Bob for someone who brought it in late. It was just a request for, to give out grants from this account that are small, no more than $200,000 for this next biennium. So that came from the committee chair. And she was late, so I had my name on it.
Okay, all right. Just, they'll be very small. Okay. 128.
I believe we're on 129.
129.
This was a Senate third reading amendment number 54. This has two components to it. One, half of the interest off of the reserve accounts, that's the Common School Permanent Land Fund Reserve Account and the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund Reserve Account, rather than retaining its own interest, half of that interest would go to the respective permanent fund. So the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund Reserve Account's interest would go in equal parts to the PMTF Reserve Account and the PMTF. Likewise for the Common School. Second component.
Just a moment, Don. Interest or investment earnings?
Investment earnings.
Okay.
And the reason I kind of bounce back between that is currently those funds are invested in the SAP, so all investment earnings are interest.
I see.
That's not the goal, but today they're all one and the same.
Okay.
And so but the net effect of that is to slow down the growth of those to get to 7X.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. On the PMTF side, 18 million would be deposited in the corpus, and on the Common School side, 22 million would be deposited in the corpus based on our best forecast.
And continue, Don.
The second component of this same amendment, item number 129, is to reduce the spending policy for the period of the biennium from 5% to 4.5%. This has a somewhat unknown effect, particularly on the PMTF side, so that's why I say potential net effect on the PMTF side of $94 million, which would be retained in the reserve account rather than deployed to the LSRA and SIPA. In the case of the Common School account, the potential impact is $47.3 million, which would be retained in the reserve account and would not be guaranteed to be spent on K-12 school education, school foundation program.
$9.5 million in RA versus the LISRA in the reserve account versus in the PMTF corpus. I've got 95 million in the reserve account rather than in.
Oh, excuse me, $94 million
Okay.
would be in the PMTF reserve account as opposed to the expenditure accounts, in this case, LSRA and SIPA.
Okay, that's what I thought. Gotcha.
And on the Common School side, 47.3 million would be retained in the reserve account rather than deployed to the school foundation program.
Gotcha.
Mr. Chairman?
Representative Stith.
Mr. Chairman, going back to item 128, I think my colleague has found an answer to your question. This Outdoor Recreation Tourism Trust Fund amendment is very similar, if not identical, to what's in House Bill 60, 67, House Bill 67.
And I believe that's what we just heard over on the Senate floor today. Okay?
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Larson.
thank you. Don, on your explanation on the, the first piece that you explained, so the investment earnings for 25 and 26, the investment earnings that we have previously decided to dedicate to the two reserve accounts, the the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund Reserve Account and the Common School Reserve Account, they'll take those investment earnings, instead of the total going to the reserve account, it'll be split half to the reserve account and half to the permanent, to the corpus?
Mr. Chairman, yes. And you might be concerned with the size, but these are pretty sizable funds, so, okay.
No, I'm just trying to so my question then is why, as we've been trying to grow those reserve accounts, why do we want to, for these 2 years, take the earnings and split it in half between the reserve account and the permanent fund? What was the conversation, Mr. Chairman, if you would, please?
Well, Representative, if I'd been on the cap fin, I could give you a more intelligent answer, but the bringer of this amendment is dedicated to 5X and 7X every bit as much as everybody else, so I don't think it's an intent to do anything. I think he's just trying to get, with respect to the first, to try and help build the corpus a little bit, and with respect to the second, just slow down the spending by reducing the spending policy. That's the net effect of it.
Fair enough, just, I guess I'm not, it seems the sooner we get it to 5X, the sooner you would build, but I understand that's the conversation on the floor, and there you go.
And Representative Larson, you're talking to somebody that's always had some real hesitancy about 5X and 7X. I hate for that much money to be available for politicians to dip into, but that's a whole conversation for another day. I like to see it go into the corpus, but that's a debate I lost, and somehow I ended up voting for the 7X, 5X, even though I didn't like it, so. Sweet talking. That co-chair of appropriations, he's a tough guy. All right, page 11.
Last page, Mr. Chairman, item number 130. The Senate, third reading amendment number 55, removes the SIPA account. In doing so, it redirects all revenue to the general fund and shifts all associated liabilities also to the general fund, just for the period of the budget, fiscal year 25 and 26. Let me walk through a little bit more detail on that. Specifically, the Senate removed all of the appropriations in this bill that were SIPA and redirected them from the general fund. So you'll see $19 million to SCR was SIPA, now is general fund. Eliminates any transfers between the two accounts. That's the $174 million on the next line. Removed the major maintenance funding from the SIPA account to the general fund. That's the $168 million. Provided for the community college appropriation matching funds to come out of the SIPA account. On this one, the Senate did not modify the trigger language that would only make these match funds available if the capital construction bill passes. The capital construction bill has failed, and as a result, that $9.3 million would not be available for community college matching funds in the Senate position. Next, the associated annual contribution beginning with this fiscal year 2024, for the penitentiary capital construction account in the amount of $10 million per year for 3 consecutive years, totaling $30 million, would be paid for out of the general fund rather than the SIPA account. Finally, I think it's worth noting that while all of the revenue that SIPA would have received is now being deposited into the general fund, none of the guarantees are there. So the guarantee of 2.5% that would have been deposited into the SIPA fund, now it is whatever investment earnings are available would be deposited into the general fund, which may be more or less, or excuse me, could be less, can't be more than the 1.25%. Finally, there is no guarantee and in fact no transfer to the school foundation program. You'll recall SIPA provides 45% of its income per year transferred to the school foundation program. That's the old school major maintenance account. And that is also de facto eliminated by the action of the Senate on third reading amendment number 55.
So did the Senate take any other action to backfill major maintenance from the school side?
Mr. Chairman, no, just revenues available to the SFP.
Mr. Chairman?
Please.
So the way I read this then, so we've got this being administered out of the SIPA account. We move it out of the SIPA account for 2 years, and then we move it back into the SIPA account in 2 years? Is that the?
Well, Mr. Co-Chair, this is just some of the things that we as a JAC have done over the last several budget cycles, where we'll dig into the green books and we'll change things for 2 years and come back later and haggle over whether they're gonna go this way or that way. This, I think the intent of this is to move us closer to a single checking account and a single savings account or we have one saving account for the state, one for schools, one checking account for the state, one for the schools, trying to simplify the chart of accounts. And as part of, the guarantee of SIPA, the backstop and all that, we did that in the dark days before we got where we are now, when we're dedicated to 5X and 7X. I mean, the money's there, we're gonna take care of the schools.
What dark days? I was there when we did it, it wasn't dark.
So, Mr. Chairman?
Well, I remember Mr. Co-Chair, I remember there were some days where, it was a little dodgy as to just how much funding was available, and there was concern, consternation, are we really gonna take care of the schools? And so some of these things were engineered, the backstops, the guarantees and all that sort of thing. But since then, and it's largely, Mr. Co-Chair, due to you and the bringer of this amendment and your persistence in terms of building the corpus and 5X and 7X and building those reserve accounts, that I think it makes it possible to simplify these things.
Mr. Chairman?
Representative Larson.
So we had, in Cap Fin, we had a bill that kind of was along this line, and we spent the interim on it, didn't run it this year, but it had, to do this type of thing, it had like a 3-year implementation. And we're doing this in the budget bill now, right?
Yep.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah, and I tell you, I could be more intelligent response if I'd been on Cap Fin. I wasn't. But I think in the long run, we're all on the same page, right? I mean, was Cap Fin supportive of that bill? Oh, Cap Fin was not. Representative Walters indicates Cap Fin is not supportive of that bill. He's shaking his head. Okay? Keeps the conversation going, though. It's important to keep exploring these ideas. Okay, 131.
Item number 131, Senate third reading amendment number 56, eliminated for the period of the biennium what is commonly referred to as the LSRA backstop or backfill for the school foundation program. This provision in statute 94219B provides that there's a automatic transfer from the LSRA to the SFP in the event that the cash balance of the SFP is under $100 million, and so long as the LSRA has a balance of at least $500 million.
Okay.
Item number 132 and 133, our last two items, are very similar on both sides. This is the American Rescue Plan Act reappropriation and appropriation. Both of these provisions essentially direct funds and specify that the governor has a tremendous amount of flexibility as to the direction of those funds. There are two unique provisions. Item number 1, on the House side only, this section gives precedent over all other laws. On the Senate, that provision is not there. And then secondly, on the House side only, the House provides for suggested priorities, is the way I would describe it, that the governor should, or the governor could consider. And I believe there are 4 priorities related to water projects, inflation, mental health. And there's one more.
Representative Larson.
Yeah, Don, could I go back to that backstop from the LSRA to the school foundation program? If you could remind me of the history of that, it's going back a ways, but it's stuck in my mind that it was predicated kind of that in the event that we didn't have general funds or school foundation funds, which in the past we've had to use that backstop a few times, but it sticks in my mind that it was kind of based on the lawsuits that said education had to be funded first, and we were just making the provisions that if the school foundation was short in funding schools, that there was an avenue that took care of that without having to come back into a legislative session. Might fix my mistakes, please.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, it has been in effect. I don't recall exactly how long, but approximately a decade, I would say, roughly. It has been used just once, and I think the transfer was around $82 million when there were insufficient funds in the school foundation program. I don't believe it was a direct outgrowth of any of the lawsuits, but you are correct in that the cases, to my knowledge, indicated that this was a priority expenditure for the legislature, and K-12 must be funded.
Mr. Co-Chair, just to go back to 132, 133, I assume you're aware that the Senate still had an ARPA bill live. We sent it over to you, so these footnotes may or may not be necessary depending on what the House does with the ARPA bill over there on your side.
Yeah, he has not come out to the floor yet.
Okay.
But it does, I'm sure you'll like what we do.
Could be. Mr. Co-Chair, originally I had some ambitions that we would go through here and out of consideration for staff, start knocking off, adopt, delete, or delete and further amend, at least the ones that are identical and some that are similar, but we're pushing 7 o'clock. I've got some other obligations. We're meeting again tomorrow at noon, correct?
Correct,
Or was it 12:30?
12:30.
12:30. You'll be chairing. Would you like to,
So-
what's your pleasure? Would you like to start?
So I think, Mr. Co-Chair, the preference of the House is, rather than just taking the little stuff, let's just, I think we'll come back to you with a proposal of the big stuff. And so let's just start taking on the hard stuff tomorrow,
Okay,
okay?
sounds good. So it's a half-hour meeting?
Yeah. We can be done if you want.
All right. Anything further? Any committee members, staff, anything further before we adjourn? All right, thank you, folks. We're off to a good start. Appreciate it.